Hello, my friends. My name is Stephen Greider, and in this course, I'm going to tell you everything I know about PostgreSQL. We're going to learn a lot about Postgres, and we're even going to start the discussion around it right now inside this video. So let's dive right in. First off, what are databases all about? Well, at a very basic level, we use databases to store information. So we take some amount of data from some source, put it inside of a database where it gets persisted in either memory or on hard disk, and then eventually we retrieve that data at some future point in time. To work with a Postgres database, we are going to connect to it using something called a client. A client can be any piece of software, so it might be some API server you put together, it might be some utility program designed to connect to a Postgres database and investigate some of the data inside of it, and even a wide variety of other different types of clients. You're going to see an example of a really interesting client here in the next couple of videos. When we connect a client to a database, we are going to write some SQL. SQL is kind of like a programming language of sorts. It tells our database some information that we want to put inside of it, that we want to retrieve, update, or delete. SQL is the number one way in which we interact with a Postgres database, so it is very important for us to understand how to understand and write SQL at a very practical level. In this diagram, there are a couple of examples of different SQL queries. So we're going to eventually write SQL to add data, read data, update it, or delete it from our database. When we start to think about SQL, it is something that is very separate and very different than Postgres itself. SQL is a communication language. It is how we interface or interact with our database. SQL is supported by many other databases as well, such as Oracle, Microsoft SQL, MySQL, and so on. Once you learn SQL for one of these databases, you're generally going to be able to use that same knowledge and apply it to these other types of databases as well. There's not always 100% clean transfer of information or knowledge going from one database to another, but in general, if you just understand SQL, you're going to have an easier time working with these other types of databases. When we start to work with Postgres, there are 4 big challenges that we start to think about, and these are the 4 challenges that we're really going to focus on inside this course. First off, how to write efficient queries to retrieve information out of our database. Remember, we write SQL in order to put information into our database, to read it, to update it, and destroy it. But out of those 4 different operations, writing SQL to retrieve information is by far the most important and generally the most complicated as well. So we're going to spend a lot of time understanding how to use SQL to just retrieve information in a very efficient fashion out of our database. The next big challenge that we're going to run into is understanding how to design the schema or the structure of our database. There are almost an infinite number of ways to structure information or data that is stored inside of your database, and it turns out that it's kind of hard to decide what approach is the best. So we're going to spend a lot of time to go over a lot of different schema designs and really understand some different concerns that goes into it. Next up, out of all these different databases that you might use when you are writing SQL, every single one of them has different sets of advanced features. Understanding when to use these advanced features is generally pretty challenging. And it might turn out that, well, you never use any advanced features out of any given database, and you just use it as a plain data storage mechanism. But Postgres itself has a lot of special features tied to it, and sometimes it makes a lot of sense to use these, and sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to investigate a lot of these different features and understand when you should be using them. And then finally, the last big challenge, managing our database in a production environment. So for example, running backups, backing up information that is stored inside of your database, scaling your database to serve more users or more traffic. There's a wide variety of different things we need to understand when we start to run a database in production. We're going to take a look at some of these different techniques and really understand what goes into them as well. Okay, so just a little overview on Postgres, a little overview on what we're going to do inside this course. So let's continue diving into the world of Postgres in the next video.